Welcome to an extraordinary story of love, betrayal, and survival that will leave you speechless. Maggie Parker's life seemed picture-perfect until a devastating discovery turned her world upside down. When she uncovers her husband Ben's shocking infidelity, Maggie believes the worst is behind her. But she couldn't be more wrong. As she digs deeper into his web of lies, she uncovers a shocking connection to a dangerous criminal network, putting her and her family in unimaginable danger. From uncovering secret affairs to facing life-threatening confrontations, Maggie's journey is one of resilience, courage, and an unrelenting quest for the truth. This gripping tale of manipulation, betrayal, and high-stakes drama will have you questioning the true cost of loyalty and what it takes to fight for what matters most. Stay tuned as Maggie's harrowing battle for survival unfolds, with twists and turns you'll never see coming. You don't want to miss this. It all started in the fall of 2018 in a quiet suburban town just outside Chicago. The leaves were changing, painting the streets in warm hues of orange and red. It was the kind of neighborhood where everyone smiled at each other, but secrets lived behind every perfectly manicured lawn. And at the heart of this seemingly idyllic setting was the Parker family. Maggie Parker, 34, was the kind of woman who seemed to have it all. She was a part-time nurse and full-time mom, juggling work, PTA meetings, and soccer practices like it was second nature. Maggie was petite, with dark brown curls always tied in a loose bun, and a smile that hid the exhaustion in her eyes. Her husband, Ben Parker, 36, worked as a project manager for a tech firm. Ben was a quiet guy, the kind who blended into the background but always came through when it mattered, or so Maggie thought. The Parkers had 2 children, Ella, 8, and Lucas, 5. They were adorable, full of energy, and blissfully unaware of the storm brewing within their home. At first glance, Maggie and Ben seemed like the perfect couple. They had been high school sweethearts, married for over a decade. But as with most relationships, the cracks weren't visible to outsiders. Let's rewind a little. Maggie and Ben's marriage had been strained for a while. It wasn't dramatic, no screaming matches or slammed doors, but there was a quiet distance growing between them. Ben often worked late, and when he was home, he seemed preoccupied. Maggie chalked it up to the stress of his job. After all, she had her own hands full with the kids and her shifts at the hospital. But then there were the signs. Subtle at first, Ben's phone always face down, unexplained absences on weekends, and a sudden interest in working out. Maggie dismissed these as her imagination running wild. She trusted Ben. They had built a life together. That trust was shattered one cold November night. It was a Friday evening, and the kids had gone to bed early after a long day of school and playdates. Maggie was curled up on the couch with a glass of wine, flipping through Netflix options, when Ben's phone buzzed on the coffee table. He was in the kitchen, cleaning up after dinner, and didn't seem to notice. Normally, Maggie wouldn't have thought twice about it, but something made her pause. Maybe it was the way Ben had been acting distant lately, or maybe it was intuition. The screen lit up, displaying a text preview. "Can't wait to see you again, Jess." Maggie's heart skipped a beat. Her mind raced, trying to rationalize it. Jess could be anyone, a coworker, a friend, but the winking emoji. That wasn't normal, was it? Ben walked back into the room, drying his hands on a dish towel, and Maggie quickly averted her gaze. "You okay?" he asked, noticing her tense expression. She forced a smile. "Yeah, just tired." But inside, she was anything but okay. Over the next few days, Maggie couldn't shake the unease. That text had planted a seed of doubt, and it grew with every passing moment. She started paying closer attention to Ben, his phone habits, his schedule, even the way he talked to her. It didn't take long for her to find more clues. There were unexplained charges on their credit card, fancy restaurants she hadn't been to, a boutique hotel she'd never heard of. Ben had also started taking business trips more frequently, leaving her to manage the kids on her own. Maggie knew she needed answers, but she wasn't sure how to get them. She confided in her best friend, Rachel, who worked as a paralegal and had seen her fair share of messy divorces. "You need to be sure before you confront him," Rachel said over coffee one morning. "If he's cheating, he'll lie. You need evidence." The thought of snooping made Maggie feel sick. She hated the idea of invading Ben's privacy. But at the same time, she couldn't ignore the growing suspicion gnawing at her. It happened on a Wednesday night. Ben was in the shower, and his phone was charging on the nightstand. Maggie knew this was her chance. Her hands trembled as she picked up the phone and unlocked it. Ben had always been terrible at keeping passwords secret. She scrolled through his messages, her stomach churning with every swipe. And then she saw it. A long thread of messages with someone named Jess. "Jess, I can't stop thinking about last weekend. You looked so good in that suit." "Ben, you're too much." "Jess, when's your next trip? I miss you already." Maggie felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Her hands shook so badly she almost dropped the phone. It wasn't just the texts, it was the photos. Selfies of a woman Maggie had never seen before. Blonde and glamorous, lounging in what looked like a hotel room. She put the phone down, her mind racing. The betrayal was undeniable. Maggie didn't sleep that night. She couldn't. The next morning, after dropping the kids off at school, she confronted Ben. "Who's Jess?" she asked, her voice trembling. Ben froze, his face going pale. "What are you talking about?" "I saw the texts," Maggie said, her anger bubbling to the surface. "Don't lie to me, Ben." He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The silence was deafening. "Are you in love with her?" Maggie asked, tears streaming down her face. Ben shook his head. "It's not like that. It was just a mistake." "A mistake?" Maggie laughed bitterly. "Texting her every day, taking her to hotels. That's not a mistake, Ben. That's a choice." Ben didn't argue. He looked down at the floor, his shoulders slumped in defeat. For the next few weeks, the Parkers' home was a war zone. Maggie and Ben tried to keep things civil for the kids, but the tension was palpable. Every interaction felt like walking on a tightrope. Maggie couldn't bring herself to forgive Ben, not yet, maybe not ever. She spent hours replaying their conversations, trying to figure out where things had gone wrong. Was it her fault? Had she been too focused on the kids, too tired from work to notice the cracks in their marriage? Meanwhile, Ben stayed in the guest room, avoiding eye contact and tiptoeing around her like a guilty child. Rachel suggested therapy, but Maggie wasn't ready. She needed time to process everything, to decide what she wanted. And then, one day, she found something that changed everything. It was a Saturday morning, and Maggie was doing laundry when she found a receipt in Ben's jacket pocket. It was for a jewelry store, a diamond necklace, purchased just 2 weeks ago. Her heart sank. It wasn't for her. Maggie knew she couldn't keep living like this. She deserved answers, closure, something. So, she decided to do something she never thought she'd do. She hired a private investigator. The decision to hire a private investigator wasn't an easy one. Maggie felt a mix of shame and resolve. Part of her feared what the PI might uncover, but another part needed to know everything. If her marriage was over, she wanted the whole truth, not just Ben's watered-down version of events. Enter Mark. Mark Lawson was the kind of guy you'd imagine in an old noir movie. Sharp suit, a cigarette dangling from his lips, though he'd quit years ago, and a knack for finding the truth in the darkest corners. He'd come recommended by Rachel, and after a brief meeting at a diner, Maggie knew he was the right person for the job. "Look, Mrs. Parker," Mark said, scribbling notes into a leather-bound notebook. "These things never get easier, but I promise I'll get you the answers you're looking for." Maggie nodded, her hands trembling around her coffee cup. "I just want to know everything." Mark gave her a reassuring smile. "You will." While Mark worked behind the scenes, Maggie tried to keep her life from falling apart. She threw herself into routines, work, the kids, and anything to keep her mind busy. But the tension in the house was unbearable. Ben wasn't blind to Maggie's coldness, and he made a few half-hearted attempts to repair the damage. "Maggie," he said one evening as they sat at opposite ends of the couch. "I know I screwed up, but we can fix this, right?" Maggie didn't look up from the book she was pretending to read. "I don't know, Ben. Can we?" The silence that followed was deafening. Ben sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'll do whatever it takes. Therapy, counseling. Anything." Maggie finally looked at him, her eyes hard. "You should have thought about that before, Jess." 2 weeks later, Mark called Maggie to meet him at his office. The moment she stepped inside, she knew this wasn't going to be good news. Mark slid a manila envelope across the desk, his expression grim. "This is everything I found. I won't sugarcoat it, it's bad." Maggie hesitated, her fingers trembling as she opened the envelope. Inside were photos, receipts, and reports detailing Ben's double life. It wasn't just Jess. There were other women, one-night stands during business trips, flirty exchanges on dating apps, and even a membership to a site for married people seeking affairs. Maggie felt like the room was spinning. I don't understand. How could he?" Mark's voice was calm but firm. "Some people are good at hiding who they really are." "I'm sorry, Maggie." That night, Maggie sat in her car in the driveway, staring at the photos Mark had given her. She thought about her kids, her marriage, and the years she had wasted on someone who clearly didn't value her. Enough was enough. The next morning, Maggie told Ben they needed to talk. They sat at the kitchen table, the tension thick in the air. "I know about Jess," she began, her voice steady. "And the others." Ben's face went pale. "Others? Maggie, I don't," she snapped, slamming the envelope onto the table. "I have proof, Ben. I know everything." Ben stared at the envelope, his hands shaking. "I can explain." "No, you can't," Maggie cut him off. "This isn't just one mistake, Ben. This is a pattern, a choice you've been making for years. And I'm done." Ben looked like he wanted to argue, but the words wouldn't come. In the weeks that followed, Maggie began taking steps to rebuild her life. She reached out to a lawyer, started therapy, and leaned on Rachel and her family for support. One evening, as she was tucking Ella into bed, her daughter asked, "Mommy, is Daddy going to live somewhere else?" Maggie's heart broke, but she forced herself to smile. "Yes, sweetie, but you'll still see him. And he loves you very much." Ella frowned, her little brow furrowing in thought. "Do you love him?" Maggie hesitated, then kissed her daughter's forehead. "I love you and your brother more than anything. That's all that matters right now." Meanwhile, Ben was spiraling. He tried everything to win Maggie back: flowers, tearful apologies, promises to change. But Maggie saw through it all. One night, Ben showed up at Rachel's house, where Maggie had been staying temporarily. He was drunk, slurring his words as he begged her to come home. "Maggie, please," he said, tears streaming down his face. "I'll do anything. Just don't leave me." Rachel stepped in, her tone icy. "You need to leave, Ben. Now." As Ben stumbled out the door, Maggie felt a pang of sadness. She had loved him once, but that person was gone. Mark's investigation also revealed something Maggie hadn't anticipated: financial infidelity. Ben had been hiding debts, taking out loans, and gambling away money she didn't even know they had. This was the final straw. Maggie filed for divorce, her lawyer reassuring her that she had a strong case for full custody. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she was ready to fight for her kids and her future. Before we dive into what happens next, let me know your thoughts so far in the comments below. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss an update. Your support means everything. As the divorce proceedings began, Maggie felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time in years, she was taking control of her life. She started going to the gym, reconnecting with old friends, and even considering going back to school to pursue a degree in counseling. But just when she thought things were settling down, a new twist emerged. The legal battle was more draining than Maggie could have ever imagined. Days turned into weeks of meetings with her lawyer, documenting every detail of her marriage's downfall. And just when she thought she had a handle on things, Ben proved he wasn't going down without a fight. It started with small acts of defiance, showing up late for court-mandated meetings, making snide remarks in the hallways. But it quickly escalated. One morning, Maggie's lawyer, Carla, called her into the office. "We need to talk," Carla said, her voice serious. Ben's lawyers filed a motion for joint custody. Maggie's stomach dropped. What? He barely spends time with the kids. How can he even? He's claiming you're unfit to be the primary caregiver, Carla explained. That your emotional instability and over-reliance on friends make you a bad influence. Maggie felt like the wind had been knocked out of her. "He's lying," she said, her voice shaking. Carla nodded. "I know. But we need to be prepared. This is going to get ugly." The courtroom battles were brutal. Ben's lawyer painted Maggie as a bitter, vengeful woman out to ruin her husband's life. They even brought up her decision to hire a private investigator, twisting it into a narrative of paranoia and distrust. Maggie did her best to keep her composure, but inside, she was boiling. How could Ben play the victim when he was the one who destroyed their marriage? And then, there was the ultimate betrayal. One afternoon, as Maggie picked the kids up from school, Ella climbed into the car with tears streaming down her face. "Mommy," she sobbed. "Daddy said you don't want him to see us anymore. Is that true?" Maggie's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "What?" "No, sweetie, that's not true." But Ella wasn't convinced. "He said you're trying to make him go away forever. Why would you do that?" Maggie's heart broke as she realized what was happening. Ben was using the kids against her, planting seeds of doubt in their young minds. Maggie couldn't let this slide. That evening, she drove to Ben's new apartment, her anger bubbling just below the surface. She knocked on the door, her heart pounding as she waited for him to answer. When Ben opened the door, he looked surprised, and not in a good way. "Maggie," he said, his tone cautious. "What are you doing here?" "We need to talk," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Ben sighed, closing the door behind her. "If this is about the custody hearing, it's about what you said to Ella." Maggie interrupted, her voice trembling with anger. "How dare you tell her I don't want you in their lives? Do you have any idea how much you're hurting them?" Ben's expression hardened. "I didn't lie. You're the one who's trying to cut me out." "I'm trying to protect them from your lies," Maggie shot back. "You think you can just manipulate them into hating me? You're pathetic, Ben." The argument escalated, voices rising as years of resentment and pain spilled out into the open. "You're no saint, Maggie," Ben snapped. "You act like you're perfect. But you've made your share of mistakes too." "None of my mistakes destroyed our family," she retorted. After their heated exchange, Maggie stormed out, her mind racing. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Ben's behavior than just anger or guilt. The next day, she called Mark. "I need you to look into something for me," she said. Mark didn't need much convincing. Over the weeks, he developed a genuine sympathy for Maggie and her situation. It didn't take long for him to uncover the truth. 2 weeks later, Mark handed Maggie another envelope. This time, the contents weren't just about Ben's affairs, they revealed a much darker side to his life. Ben had been embezzling money from his company for years, using fake accounts and shell corporations to funnel cash into his personal finances. "This isn't just bad, it's criminal," Mark said. "If this gets out, he could go to prison." Maggie felt a wave of conflicting emotions. Part of her was furious that Ben's selfishness extended beyond their marriage. But another part of her felt vindicated. She finally had leverage. Armed with this new information, Maggie decided to confront Ben once and for all. She met him at a neutral location, a quiet park where the kids wouldn't overhear. "I know about the money," she said, cutting straight to the point. Ben's face went white. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb, Ben. I have the evidence. You've been stealing from your company. And if you don't back off, I'll make sure they know." Ben stared at her, a mix of anger and panic flashing across his face. You wouldn't. Maggie crossed her arms. Try me. For the first time in months, Ben looked defeated. He slumped onto a nearby bench, running a hand through his hair. I screwed up, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I was just trying to keep everything together. The house, the cars, the vacations, it was all for you and the kids. Maggie's eyes narrowed. Don't you dare pin this on me. You didn't do this for us. You did it for yourself. Ben didn't argue. He just nodded, his shoulders sagging under the weight of his mistakes. In the end, Maggie made him an offer. She wouldn't expose him to his company or the authorities if he agreed to her custody terms. You don't deserve this deal, she said. But I'm doing it for Ella and Lucas. They don't need to lose their father completely. Ben agreed, reluctantly signing the papers that would grant Maggie primary custody. With the custody battle settled, Maggie finally felt like she could breathe again. She moved back into the family home with the kids, determined to create a stable, loving environment for them. But she knew this wasn't the end of her journey. There were still scars to heal, trust to rebuild, and a future to plan. And just when she thought the dust had settled, another unexpected twist threatened to shake everything up again. Just when Maggie thought she could finally move forward, life threw another curveball. Ben had signed the custody agreement. Sure, but people like him didn't just walk away quietly. For weeks, Maggie had been working on rebuilding her life. She focused on the kids, her work, and trying to find a sense of normalcy. But something wasn't right. She couldn't shake the feeling that Ben wasn't finished causing trouble. One evening, as Maggie was locking up the house, she noticed a car parked across the street. It had been there for hours, its headlights off, the silhouette of someone inside barely visible. Her heart raced. Was it Ben? Someone connected to his shady dealings? Gripping her phone, Maggie stepped out onto the porch. The cool night air sent a shiver down her spine, but she forced herself to walk toward the car. As she approached, the car's engine roared to life, and it sped off into the night, leaving her standing there, her heart pounding in her chest. When she returned inside, she immediately called Mark. There's something going on, she said. I think someone's watching me. The next day, Mark paid Maggie a visit. He combed through her property, looking for signs of tampering or surveillance. You're not crazy, he said, holding up a small black device he'd found attached to her car. This is a GPS tracker. Maggie's stomach churned. Who would do this? Ben? Mark frowned. It's possible. Or it could be someone he owes money to. Either way, this isn't good. Maggie confronted Ben the following week. She found him at a local cafe, casually sipping coffee as if he hadn't turned her life upside down. What the hell is wrong with you? She hissed, slamming a photo of the tracker onto the table. Ben's eyes widened, but he quickly recovered. I have no idea what you're talking about. Don't lie to me, Maggie snapped. Is this your way of trying to control me? Or are you just that paranoid? Ben leaned back in his chair, smirking. Maybe you should ask yourself why someone else might be interested in tracking you. Ben's cryptic remark lingered in Maggie's mind. If it wasn't him, who else could it be? That question was answered a week later when Maggie received a knock on her door. A man in a dark suit stood on her porch, his expression unreadable. Mrs. Parker, he asked, his voice low and formal. Yes, I'm Agent Carson with the FBI. We need to talk. Agent Carson revealed that Ben's embezzlement scheme was part of a larger investigation. His company had been under surveillance for months. And Ben wasn't just a small-time player, he was the linchpin in a network of fraud and money laundering. We believe your husband's actions have put you and your children at risk, Carson explained. There are people who want him silenced, and they won't hesitate to use you as leverage. Maggie's mind reeled. She had known Ben was selfish, but this was a whole new level of betrayal. What do I do? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Carson handed her a card. Stay alert. If you notice anything suspicious, call me immediately. That night, Maggie barely slept. She double-checked the locks, peeked out the windows, and kept her phone within arm's reach. Around midnight, she heard a noise outside, soft, deliberate, like someone trying to open a window. Her heart raced as she grabbed the nearest weapon she could find, a heavy flashlight, and crept toward the sound. When she flung open the curtains, she caught a glimpse of a figure darting away into the shadows. The next morning, she called Carson. "I'm not safe here," she said. Carson arranged for Maggie and the kids to stay at a secure location, a modest house in a gated community under constant surveillance. It wasn't ideal, but it was safe. Ella and Lucas didn't fully understand what was happening, but Maggie reassured them as best she could. "This is just temporary," she said. "We're going to be okay." A month later, Maggie got the call she had been waiting for. "Ben's in custody," Carson said. "We got him." Relief washed over her, but it was short-lived. Carson warned her that the people Ben had been working with might still pose a threat. "We're keeping a close eye on things," he assured her. "But you need to be careful." The final straw came during a visit from Mark. He had been digging deeper into Ben's dealings and uncovered something Maggie hadn't expected. "There's a woman," Mark said. "She's been meeting with Ben's associates. I think she's feeding them information about you." Maggie's blood ran cold. "Who?" Mark hesitated. "Her name's Jess." Maggie felt a surge of adrenaline as she realized the truth. Jess wasn't just Ben's mistress, she was involved in his criminal activities. And now, she was targeting Maggie. With Mark's help, Maggie set a trap. They arranged a meeting with Jess under the guise of a fake business deal, luring her to a public place where the FBI could intervene. The plan worked. Jess showed up, unaware that she was walking straight into a sting operation. As the FBI agents moved in, Jess tried to run, but it was too late. They arrested her on the spot, along with two of Ben's former associates who had been watching from a distance. For the first time in months, Maggie felt like she could finally breathe. The threat was gone, and she could focus on rebuilding her life without fear. She returned home with Ella and Lucas, determined to create a fresh start for her family. It wouldn't be easy, but she was ready to move forward. Maggie thought Jess's arrest would be the end of her nightmare. But as she soon discovered, things were far from over. Jess had been the tip of the iceberg. The network Ben had been entangled with wasn't just criminal, it was dangerous. And now, with Jess in custody and Ben facing a lengthy trial, Maggie and her family were left exposed to the fallout. It started with a phone call. Maggie was at work when her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She hesitated before answering, her heart skipping a beat. "Mrs. Parker?" The voice was deep and unfamiliar. "Stay out of things that don't concern you," the voice growled. "This is your only warning." The line went dead before she could respond. Maggie's hands shook as she stared at her phone. It wasn't hard to figure out who was behind the threat. She immediately called Agent Carson, relaying the conversation. "Stay calm," Carson said. "We've got people watching your house, and we're tightening security on you and the kids. But you need to be vigilant." Maggie nodded, though the reassurance felt hollow. That night, Carson showed up at Maggie's door with a new face in tow. Agent Sarah Mills, a no-nonsense operative with a sharp gaze and an even sharper mind. "I'll be your main point of contact moving forward," Sarah said, shaking Maggie's hand firmly. "We're going to get through this." Maggie appreciated Sarah's confidence, but she couldn't shake the fear that had taken root in her chest. Over the next few days, Sarah helped Maggie implement new safety measures, panic buttons, a reinforced security system, and a discreet but visible FBI presence in the neighborhood. But even with these precautions, the tension was unbearable. Every knock at the door, every passing car felt like a potential threat. One evening, while Maggie was helping Ella with her homework, Sarah called with urgent news. "We've intercepted a message from one of Ben's associates," she said. "They're planning something, but we don't know what or when. You need to stay on high alert." Maggie's stomach dropped. "What do you mean something? Are we in danger?" Sarah's hesitation spoke volumes. "We're doing everything we can to ensure your safety. Just trust us." But Maggie wasn't sure how much trust she had left to give. The next day, Maggie's worst fears came to life. She was driving the kids home from school when she noticed a black SUV following them. At first, she thought it was a coincidence. But when the vehicle matched her every turn, her instincts screamed that something was wrong. "Mommy, why are you going so fast?" Ella asked, her voice tinged with fear. "Just hold on, sweetie," Maggie said, trying to keep her voice steady. She grabbed her phone and dialed Sarah. "I think we're being followed," she said, her voice shaking. "Where are you?" Sarah asked, her tone immediately alert. Maggie rattled off her location, and Sarah responded quickly. "Get to the nearest police station. We're sending backup." Maggie's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as she sped toward the station. The SUV stayed close, its windows tinted, making it impossible to see who was inside. As Maggie pulled into the police station parking lot, the SUV suddenly swerved away, disappearing into the night. Sarah and a team of agents arrived moments later, their faces grim. "They're testing you," Sarah said, "trying to scare you into backing off." "Well, it's working," Maggie snapped, her fear giving way to frustration. "How am I supposed to protect my kids from this?" Sarah placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You're not alone in this, Maggie. We've got your back." But Maggie wasn't sure if that was enough. Meanwhile, Ben was still in custody, facing a mountain of charges. Maggie hadn't spoken to him since his arrest, but one day, she received a request. Ben wanted to see her. At first, she refused. But after some convincing from Carson and Sarah, she agreed to a supervised meeting. Ben looked disheveled when she saw him, his once confident demeanor replaced by a haunted expression. "I didn't know it would get this bad," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Maggie's anger flared. "You didn't know. You're the one who put us in danger." "Ben, how could you not see this coming?" "I made mistakes," he admitted. "But Maggie, they're serious. If they think you're a threat to their operation, they won't stop." "Then give them something to stop them," she snapped. "Help the FBI, Ben. It's the least you can do for your kids." Ben nodded, his gaze heavy with regret. Ben's cooperation proved invaluable. He provided crucial details about the criminal network, including names, locations, and upcoming plans. Armed with this information, the FBI launched a massive operation to dismantle the network. But it wasn't without risks. Maggie and the kids were moved to an even more secure location, under 24-hour surveillance. The stress was nearly unbearable, but Maggie clung to the hope that this nightmare would soon be over. The operation came to a head in a dramatic raid on one of the network's key locations. The news broke in the early hours of the morning, with headlines announcing the arrest of several high-ranking members of the organization. Maggie watched the coverage from her safe house, her emotions a whirlwind of relief, anger, and exhaustion. "We got them," Sarah said, sitting beside her. "You're safe now." But Maggie wasn't sure she would ever feel safe again. Before we wrap up this intense chapter, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more gripping stories like this one. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Your support keeps us going. The arrests of several high-ranking members in the criminal network should have been the end, but as Maggie quickly learned, it was only the beginning. The FBI operation had exposed deeper layers of corruption, and with Ben's cooperation, even more dangerous players were now in the spotlight. For Maggie, this meant that her life wasn't out of danger just yet. The safe house felt more like a prison than a refuge. Maggie and the kids were confined to its walls, their every move monitored for safety. The constant presence of agents and security cameras was supposed to bring comfort, but instead, it only reminded Maggie of how precarious their situation had become. One evening, as Ella and Lucas slept soundly in their shared room, Maggie sat in the small kitchen with Agent Sarah Mills. "Do you really think this is over?" Maggie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "Not yet. But we're getting closer. These guys don't like being exposed, and when they feel cornered, they make mistakes. That's when we catch them." Maggie wasn't comforted. "And what happens to us if they decide to stop making mistakes and come after me directly?" Sarah didn't answer right away, which told Maggie everything she needed to know. The following day, Maggie received a chilling reminder of how far the network's reach extended. A package arrived at the safe house, a small, unassuming box with no return address. The agents opened it with caution, revealing a single, blood-red rose and a note that read, "You can run, but you can't hide." Maggie's hands shook as she stared at the note. The message was clear. They knew where she was. Sarah immediately called Carson, who arrived within the hour. "We're tightening security," Carson said, his jaw clenched. "No one gets near this house without going through us first." But Maggie wasn't reassured. She felt like a target painted on her back was growing larger with every passing day. Meanwhile, Ben was facing his own challenges behind bars. His decision to cooperate with the FBI had made him a marked man among the inmates, many of whom had ties to the very network he was helping dismantle. One evening, he was attacked in the prison yard, nothing life-threatening, but enough to send a message. The next time Maggie visited him, he was sporting a black eye and a bandaged hand. "What happened to you?" she asked, her voice a mix of anger and concern. "Just a reminder of who I'm dealing with," Ben said, his tone bitter. "But don't worry about me. I can handle it." Maggie frowned. "You don't have to do this alone, Ben. If there's a way to get you into protective custody." Ben shook his head. "I made my bed, Maggie. Now I have to lie in it. But I'll make sure you and the kids are safe, no matter what it takes." A week later, the FBI received intelligence that changed everything. One of Ben's former associates, a man named Victor Cortez, was planning a final, desperate move to eliminate anyone who could testify against him, including Ben and Maggie. The FBI decided to act fast, setting up a sting operation to capture Victor before he could carry out his plans. "We need your help," Carson told Maggie during a tense meeting at the safe house. "Victor wants to meet with you. He thinks he can scare you into silence, but we're going to use that meeting to take him down." Maggie's heart raced. "You want me to bait him?" "It's risky," Carson admitted. "But we'll be there every step of the way. You'll be safe." The plan was simple, at least on paper. Maggie would agree to meet Victor at a public park, wearing a wire to capture their conversation. FBI agents would be stationed nearby, ready to intervene the moment Victor made his move. Sarah spent hours preparing Maggie, coaching her on what to say and how to stay calm under pressure. "You've got this," Sarah said, placing a reassuring hand on Maggie's shoulder. The day of the meeting was cold and overcast, the kind of weather that made everything feel heavier. Maggie sat on a park bench, her nerves on edge as she waited for Victor to arrive. She spotted him before he saw her, a tall, imposing man with sharp features and an aura of menace. "Maggie Parker," Victor said as he approached, his voice smooth but threatening. "You've been causing a lot of trouble." Maggie forced herself to meet his gaze, her heart pounding. "I'm not the one breaking the law, Victor. That's on you." Victor chuckled, shaking his head. "You're braver than I expected. But let me make this simple. If you don't back off, your little family won't be so lucky next time." Maggie felt a surge of anger, but she kept her voice steady. "You think threats will scare me? I'm not backing down." Victor's expression darkened. "That's a shame. I was hoping we could avoid any unpleasantness." Before Maggie could respond, the FBI agents moved in, surrounding Victor and his men. "Hands where we can see them," Carson shouted, his weapon drawn. Victor's men tried to resist, but they were quickly subdued. Victor himself didn't struggle, though his glare was ice-cold as he looked at Maggie. "This isn't over," he growled as he was led away in handcuffs. With Victor in custody, the FBI assured Maggie that the worst was behind her. The network was crumbling, and the remaining members were either in custody or on the run. But for Maggie, the scars of the past months wouldn't heal overnight. She knew it would take time to rebuild her sense of safety and normalcy. Weeks later, Maggie stood in her backyard, watching Ella and Lucas play. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt a flicker of hope. Sarah joined her, a rare smile on her usually serious face. "You did good, Maggie," Sarah said. Not many people would have had the courage to do what you did. Maggie nodded, her gaze never leaving her kids. I just want them to have a normal life. And they will, Sarah said. You've made sure of that. Victor's arrest felt like a victory, but for Maggie, it was bittersweet. The threats might have been subdued for now. But she couldn't shake the lingering fear. The tension in her chest had become a constant companion, a reminder that the fight wasn't over. The FBI assured her that they were dismantling the network piece by piece. Yet, every headline, every mention of the case in the news made her stomach twist. What if someone slipped through the cracks? What if there were more like Victor waiting in the shadows? Meanwhile, Ben's cooperation with the FBI had started to pay off. His testimony against Victor and the others was instrumental in solidifying the case. But it also came with consequences. During one of Maggie's visits to the prison, Ben looked more haggard than ever. His once sharp suit had been replaced by a drab orange jumpsuit, and the weight of his choices was written all over his face. I did this to us, he admitted, his voice hoarse. I thought I was protecting you, but I was just protecting myself. Maggie crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. It's a little late for self-awareness, don't you think? Ben winced, but didn't argue. I know, but I'm doing everything I can to make it right. For you. For the kids. Maggie sighed. For all his faults, she couldn't deny that Ben was trying. If you really mean that, then don't stop. See this through, no matter what it costs you. While the FBI had successfully dismantled much of the network, a new player emerged from the shadows, Silas Kane. A high-ranking figure who had remained elusive throughout the investigation. Silas was ruthless, known for cleaning up loose ends with chilling efficiency. And now, with Victor and his men out of the picture, Silas was stepping in to regain control. The first sign of his involvement came in the form of a coded message intercepted by the FBI. It hinted at plans to retaliate against those who had betrayed the network. Maggie's name was on the list. The warning became reality one fateful evening. Maggie had taken Ella and Lucas to the park for some much-needed fresh air. It was a rare moment of normalcy, and for a little while, she almost felt like things were getting back to normal. But as they were packing up to leave, Maggie noticed a man watching them from across the playground. He was tall, with a dark jacket and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. Her instincts screamed at her to leave. Come on, kids, she said, trying to keep her voice calm. Let's get home. But as they approached the parking lot, the man moved to block their path. Mrs. Parker, he said, his voice low and menacing. We need to talk. Maggie's heart pounded. She stepped in front of Ella and Lucas, shielding them as best she could. I have nothing to say to you, she said, her voice trembling but firm. The man smirked. Oh, I think you'll want to hear this. Silas Kane doesn't take kindly to rats, and you've been making a lot of noise. Before Maggie could respond, a black SUV screeched into the parking lot. Two men jumped out, their weapons drawn. FBI, one of them shouted. Put your hands where we can see them. The man froze, his smirk replaced by a scowl. The agents quickly subdued him, whisking him away in handcuffs. Sarah was one of the agents in the SUV. She rushed over to Maggie, her expression a mix of relief and concern. Are you okay? She asked, scanning the area for any other threats. Maggie nodded, though her knees felt like they might give out at any moment. I think so. But he knew my name, Sarah. He knew where we were. Back at the safe house. Sarah and Carson worked late into the night to piece together how the man had found Maggie. It didn't take long to uncover the truth. Silas Kane had paid off a low-level FBI clerk to access confidential information about Maggie's location. The betrayal within their own ranks was a gut punch to everyone involved, and it only heightened the urgency of taking Silas down. This isn't just about you anymore, Carson told Maggie. Silas is sending a message to anyone who thinks they can cross him. We need to act fast. As the FBI ramped up their efforts, Maggie faced a choice. She could continue living in fear, relying on the agents to protect her, or she could take control of her own fate. One night, as she sat in the kitchen with Sarah, she made her decision. I want to help, she said. Sarah frowned. Maggie, you've been through enough. Let us handle this. No, Maggie said firmly. I can't just sit here waiting for the next threat. If there's anything I can do to end this, tell me. Sarah studied her for a long moment before nodding. Okay, but it's going to be dangerous. The plan was ambitious and risky. Maggie would act as bait to lure Silas Kane into a trap. The FBI had intercepted communications indicating that Silas wanted to meet with Maggie personally, likely to intimidate her into silence. It was the perfect opportunity to catch him, but it required Maggie to put herself directly in harm's way. Sarah and Carson assured her that she would be surrounded by agents at all times, but the thought of facing someone as dangerous as Silas still sent shivers down her spine. I can do this, she told herself as she prepared for the meeting. For my kids. For my future. The meeting took place in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, a setting straight out of a crime thriller. Maggie arrived alone, her heart pounding as she stepped into the dimly lit space. Silas was waiting for her, flanked by 2 armed guards. He was older than she expected, with a steely gaze that made her feel like he could see right through her. Mrs. Parker, he said, his tone dripping with false charm. It's a pleasure to finally meet you. Maggie forced herself to stay calm. I wish I could say the same. Silas chuckled. You've been quite the thorn in my side. But I admire your tenacity. It's almost a shame I have to silence you. Before Silas could say another word, the FBI agents moved in. The room erupted into chaos as agents swarmed the warehouse, shouting orders and subduing Silas's men. Silas tried to escape, but Sarah tackled him to the ground, her gun drawn. It's over, Kane, she said, her voice cold and steady. Silas Kane's arrest marked the end of the network's reign of terror. With their leader behind bars, the remaining members quickly fell apart, and Maggie was finally able to breathe a sigh of relief. The FBI praised her courage, and even Carson admitted that her determination had been instrumental in bringing the case to a close. For Maggie, the journey wasn't just about survival, it was about reclaiming her life. She moved out of the safe house and back into her home, determined to create a stable, loving environment for Ella and Lucas. The scars of the past months would take time to heal, but for the first time in a long time, Maggie felt hopeful. As we near the conclusion of this gripping story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more incredible tales. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing from you. With Silas Kane's arrest, Maggie finally felt a sense of relief. But as she'd learned time and time again, nothing was ever as simple as it seemed. The remnants of the network were still out there. And while they lacked Silas's leadership, they were desperate and dangerous. The FBI assured Maggie that the worst was behind her. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was still lurking in the shadows. One evening, Maggie was sorting through the stack of documents and evidence the FBI had shared with her. She wasn't sure why she couldn't just let it go. Maybe it was her way of trying to regain control over a life that had been spiraling for months. As she flipped through the pages, something caught her eye. A name. One she hadn't seen before, Anders Voss. The document listed him as an international financier with ties to Silas Kane's operations. But what sent a chill down Maggie's spine was a small note in the margin. Believed to be operating independently. Dangerous. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. Silas wasn't the only one pulling the strings. Anders Voss was still out there, and he had no reason to stop targeting her. The next morning, Maggie called Agent Sarah Mills, her voice urgent. Who is Anders Voss? She asked. Sarah hesitated. Where did you hear that name? It's in the files you gave me, Maggie said. Is he still a threat? Sarah sighed. He's on our radar, but we haven't been able to pin anything on him yet. He's slippery, Maggie, international, wealthy, and very well connected. So, what do I do? Maggie asked, her voice shaking. If he comes after me, after my kids. We won't let that happen, Sarah said firmly. And you're not alone in this. It was then that Sarah introduced Maggie to someone new, Detective Liam Harris, a specialist in tracking down high-level criminals like Anders Voss. Liam was different from the FBI agents Maggie had been working with. He was rough around the edges, with a no-nonsense attitude and a history of getting results. "You want Voss?" Liam said during their first meeting. "Then we hit him where it hurts. His money." Over the next few weeks, Maggie worked closely with Liam and Sarah to uncover Voss's financial dealings. It wasn't easy. Voss had built an empire designed to withstand scrutiny. But with Maggie's first-hand knowledge of the net work and Liam's expertise, they began to connect the dots. Their investigation led them to a key figure in Voss's operation, Nina Calloway, a high-powered attorney who had been laundering money for the network. "She's the weak link," Liam said, pointing to a dossier on Nina. "If we can flip her, we can take down Voss." But getting to Nina wouldn't be easy. She was notoriously loyal to Voss and had a reputation for keeping her clients' secrets buried deep. The team decided to stage an operation to catch Nina off guard. Maggie would once again play a central role, posing as someone looking to join Voss's network in exchange for protection. "Maggie, are you sure about this?" Sarah asked as they prepared for the meeting. "I don't have a choice," Maggie said. "If this is what it takes to protect my family, I'll do it." The plan was set. Maggie would meet Nina at an upscale restaurant, wearing a hidden wire to capture their conversation. Liam and Sarah would be nearby, ready to intervene if things went south. Maggie arrived at the restaurant, her nerves on edge. She spotted Nina almost immediately, a tall, elegant woman with piercing blue eyes and an air of authority that made everyone around her take notice. As Maggie approached, Nina gave her a cool, appraising look. "You're braver than I expected," Nina said, gesturing for Maggie to sit. "Not many people would dare to meet with someone like me." Maggie forced a smile. "I'm not most people." Their conversation was a delicate dance, with Maggie trying to gain Nina's trust without revealing too much. Nina was sharp, her questions probing, but Maggie held her ground. "You're in over your head," Nina said at one point, her tone almost pitying. "Do you really think you can outsmart someone like Anders Voss?" Maggie's heart raced, but she kept her voice steady. "I don't need to outsmart him. I just need to make him think I'm worth keeping around." As the conversation continued, Nina began to drop hints about Voss's operation. She mentioned offshore accounts, coded transactions, and key players who were still loyal to him. It was the opening Maggie had been waiting for. But just as things seemed to be going smoothly, Nina's demeanor shifted. She leaned in closer, her eyes narrowing. "Who are you really?" Nina asked, her voice low and dangerous. Maggie's stomach dropped. Before she could respond, Liam and Sarah burst into the restaurant, their guns drawn. "FBI, don't move." Nina's expression turned to one of fury as agents swarmed the room, placing her in handcuffs. "You think this is over?" Nina hissed as she was led away. "You have no idea what you've started." With Nina in custody, the team gained access to a trove of information about Voss's operations. But along with it came a chilling discovery. Voss had been planning a major retaliation against anyone involved in dismantling his network, including Maggie. "He's not going to stop," Liam said during a late-night meeting at the FBI office. "Not until we take him down for good." Maggie felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. "How much more of this do I have to endure?" Sarah placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Just a little longer. We're almost there." The team devised a plan to lure Voss out of hiding. Using the information from Nina's files, they set up a fake transaction that Voss wouldn't be able to resist. The trap was set at a private airstrip, where Voss was expected to arrive under the guise of overseeing the deal. Maggie wasn't directly involved this time, but she insisted on being there to see it through. As the team waited in position, the tension was palpable. Every second felt like an eternity. Finally, a sleek black car pulled up to the airstrip and Anders Voss stepped out. He was just as imposing as Maggie had imagined, tall, impeccably dressed, and exuding an air of untouchable confidence. But this time, he wasn't untouchable. The moment Voss stepped onto the airstrip, FBI agents swarmed him from every direction. "It's over, Voss," Carson shouted. Voss didn't resist. Instead, he smirked as if he had been expecting this all along. With Voss in custody, the network was finally dismantled. Maggie could finally breathe, knowing that the threat to her family was gone for good. As she stood outside the airstrip, watching the agents load Voss into a vehicle, Liam approached her. "You did it," he said. Maggie shook her head. "We did it." As this incredible story nears its resolution, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more gripping tales like this one. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. Anders Voss's arrest was a victory, but it wasn't the resolution Maggie had hoped for. The FBI had pulled apart his web of deceit, uncovering more layers of his criminal empire than they had anticipated. But for Maggie, it was personal. Every revelation, every headline about Voss's operations reminded her how close she had come to losing everything. She had faced down criminals, lived through relentless threats, and even helped take down one of the most dangerous networks the FBI had ever encountered. But as she soon realized, the fight wasn't just external, it was also internal. The first sign that the fallout wasn't over came in the form of a letter. Maggie found it on her doorstep one morning, tucked into an unmarked envelope. "You think this is over? We'll always find you." Her hands trembled as she read the words. She rushed inside, locking the door behind her, and immediately called Sarah. Sarah arrived within the hour, accompanied by Carson. "This wasn't random," Carson said, examining the letter. "Someone close to Voss sent this, someone we missed." "Missed?" Maggie's voice cracked with anger. "How could you miss someone when you have every piece of evidence?" "I'm not safe, am I?" Carson's face darkened. "We'll find them, Maggie. I promise." But Maggie had heard enough promises. While Maggie struggled with the new threat, Ben continued cooperating with the FBI. His testimony was pivotal, but it also came with a price. One evening, during a heavily guarded visit, Ben confessed to Maggie. "There's something I didn't tell the FBI," he admitted, his voice low. "It's about Voss." Maggie frowned. "What are you talking about?" "There's a ledger," Ben said. "It's the key to everything: transactions, names, locations. But it's still out there, and Voss hid it where no one could find it." Maggie's frustration boiled over. "And you're just telling me this now?" Ben looked away, guilt written all over his face. "I didn't think it mattered. But if that ledger falls into the wrong hands..." Maggie didn't let him finish. She stood up, her mind racing. If this ledger was as important as Ben claimed, then it was the final piece of the puzzle, and the final danger to her family. The FBI immediately launched an operation to find the ledger. With Ben's help, they identified several possible locations, all tied to properties Voss had secretly acquired over the years. Maggie, despite Sarah's objections, insisted on being part of the search. "I'm not sitting on the sidelines," she said. "Not when this could finally end everything." Sarah relented, but only on the condition that Maggie stayed under close supervision. The first location was a sprawling mansion on the outskirts of the city. It had been abandoned for years, but Ben insisted it was one of Voss's key safe houses. The FBI stormed the property, but what they found wasn't a ledger, it was a trap. The house had been rigged with surveillance equipment, and as soon as the agents entered, an alarm blared. Sarah quickly pulled Maggie back to safety as armed men descended on the house. "It's a decoy," Carson shouted, his gun drawn. The agents managed to fend off the attackers, but the message was clear: Voss's network was still active, and they weren't giving up without a fight. The second location was a storage facility in a remote industrial area. This time, the FBI approached with caution, sending in a small team to scout the site before Maggie or the other agents arrived. Inside, they found what appeared to be a treasure trove of documents, contracts, bank statements, and encrypted files. But the ledger was still missing. Maggie stood outside the facility, her anxiety mounting. Every second felt like an eternity. "We're close," Sarah said, trying to reassure her. "We just need to keep pushing." But Maggie wasn't so sure. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. One of Nina Calloway's files. Buried in the stack of legal documents was a receipt for a small storage unit in a rural town, purchased under one of Voss's aliases. "This has to be it," Liam said, examining the receipt. "It's the only lead we haven't checked." The team mobilized immediately, with Maggie once again insisting on joining them. "I need to see this through," she said. "For my kids." The storage unit was located in a desolate area, surrounded by miles of empty farmland. The team approached cautiously, knowing this could be their last chance to end the nightmare. Maggie stayed back with Sarah and a small group of agents while Liam and Carson led the entry team. As the door to the unit rolled up, a tense silence filled the air. Inside, they found the ledger, neatly tucked away in a locked metal case. But before they could celebrate, the sound of approaching vehicles shattered the quiet. "Get ready," Sarah shouted, drawing her weapon. A convoy of SUVs screeched to a halt, and armed men poured out, their guns trained on the FBI team. "You've got what you came for," one of them shouted. "Now hand it over, or we'll take it back the hard way." The air was thick with tension as the two sides faced off. Maggie stayed hidden behind the agents, her heart racing as she listened to the heated exchange. "We're not giving you anything," Carson said, his voice steady. "Then you leave us no choice," the man growled. Before anyone could react, gunfire erupted. Maggie ducked as bullets ricocheted off the walls of the storage facility. The agents returned fire, methodically taking down the attackers while protecting the ledger. Sarah stayed close to Maggie, shielding her from the chaos. After what felt like an eternity, the gunfire stopped. The attackers had been subdued, and the ledger was secure. Maggie stepped out of her hiding spot, her legs shaking. She surveyed the scene, the reality of what had just happened sinking in. "It's over," Sarah said, her voice filled with relief. But Maggie knew better. The physical fight might have ended, but the emotional toll would linger for a long time. With the ledger in FBI custody, the final pieces of Voss's empire crumbled. The remaining members of the network were arrested, and Maggie was finally able to return home with her children. As she stood in her backyard, watching Ella and Lucas play, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in months. "You did it," Sarah said, joining her on the porch. Maggie smiled faintly. "No, we did it." As this incredible story reaches its climax, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful recaps like this one. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing from you. After months of living in fear, fighting to protect her family, and helping dismantle one of the most dangerous criminal networks in the country, Maggie Parker finally had her life back. The chaos that had consumed her world had ended, leaving behind a quiet, uneasy calm. But while the physical threats had been neutralized, the emotional scars remained. For Maggie, the journey back to normalcy wasn't easy. She had spent so much time fighting to survive that she barely recognized the life she'd returned to. Her house felt both familiar and foreign, a reminder of what she'd lost and what she had managed to save. Ella and Lucas, thankfully, seemed to adapt more quickly. Kids had a way of finding joy even in the darkest times. Maggie watched as they returned to their routines: school, playdates, soccer practice. But there were moments, quiet ones, when Maggie would catch Ella staring out the window or find Lucas clinging to his favorite stuffed animal longer than usual. One night, as she tucked Lucas into bed, he looked up at her with wide, innocent eyes. "Mommy, are the bad guys gone?" Maggie paused, her heart aching at the question. "Yes, sweetheart," she said softly, brushing his hair back. "The bad guys are gone." Ben's role in taking down the network didn't erase the mistakes he had made, but it did give him a chance to redeem himself. His testimony was instrumental in securing convictions for several high-ranking members, including Anders Voss. When Maggie visited him one last time in prison, their conversation was bittersweet. "I don't expect you to forgive me," Ben said, his voice filled with regret. "But I'm glad I could do something right in the end." Maggie nodded, her expression thoughtful. "You made a lot of bad choices, Ben, but you did the right thing when it mattered. And for that, I'm grateful. It wasn't closure in the traditional sense, but it was enough. Agent Sarah Mills, who had become one of Maggie's closest allies, was also ready to move on. With the network dismantled, her role in the case was complete. On her last day in town, she stopped by Maggie's house to say goodbye. "You're stronger than you think." "Maggie," Sarah said, her tone warm. "Don't forget that." Maggie smiled. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." They hugged, a gesture that spoke to the bond they had formed through shared danger and trust. As the weeks turned into months, Maggie began to find a new rhythm. She went back to work, reconnected with friends, and even started taking online classes, something she had always wanted to do but never found the time for. The fear that had once consumed her began to fade, replaced by a quiet determination to rebuild her life on her own terms. One evening, as she sat on the porch watching the sunset, Ella joined her, curling up beside her on the swing. "Do you think things will ever be normal again?" Ella asked, her voice soft. Maggie wrapped an arm around her daughter, pulling her close. "I think we get to decide what normal is from now on," she said. Ella smiled, resting her head on Maggie's shoulder. The trial of Anders Voss became a media sensation, with reporters covering every detail. Voss, as expected, tried to paint himself as a victim of circumstance, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. Maggie didn't attend the trial. She didn't need to see Voss in court to feel closure. But she followed the updates closely, feeling a sense of justice every time a new charge was read aloud. When the verdict finally came, guilty on all counts, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. In the quiet aftermath of everything, Maggie often found herself reflecting on how much her life had changed. She had been forced to confront her fears, make impossible choices, and find strength she didn't know she had. And while the journey had been harrowing, it had also been transformative. She was no longer the same woman who had once depended on Ben to hold their family together. She was stronger, wiser, and more self-assured. Maggie's story wasn't just about survival, it was about resilience. About finding the courage to fight for what matters most. And while she knew life would always have its challenges, she was ready to face them head-on. To anyone watching her story, she had one message: no matter how dark things seem, there's always a way forward. You just have to find it. The final scene of Maggie's story was one of quiet joy. She stood in her backyard, watching Ella and Lucas chase fireflies under the warm glow of the summer sky. For the first time in a long time, Maggie felt at peace. As we close this chapter, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories like this one. Your support means the world to us, and we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for joining us on this journey, and stay tuned for more captivating recaps.